Morning, everyone, and welcome to the scoreboard. Well, look, there's many conversations that can be had. I'm sure people will say, where was Ashwin? Did he even still exist? And why would you bring Siraj back? What's with the silly short point obsession and all these things? There's a lot to unpack when it comes to this, but there wasn't a lot of runs. When it comes down to it, 107 sometimes just isn't enough.
I have a book out with Abhishek Mukherjee, and it is called Overthrowing Cricket's Empire. And it's about the stories of how each team beat England for the first time. We go all the way back to the demon Fred Spofforth getting annoyed at W.G. Grace for acting a little bit like Alex Carey. And then we come all the way to present times with Rashid Khan's England's redemption. We cover every single team to beat England in a major international, but we also talk about the incredible stories, like the barefoot basher from Fiji that almost played for New Zealand. In fact, this book is full of tales like that, like how Pakistan lost a top batter after he was on the run from an angry husband of a movie star he was having an affair with, and also how one future captain of his nation realised he might have to go out and bat at Lords and that he didn't own his own pads. Cricket was used as a tool by the empire, but what happens when those nations grow up and get good at it? Find Overthrowing Cricket's Empire on Amazon today.
All right, welcome to the scoreboard. We will be getting through just a little bit of analysis. There's a couple of interesting things to have a look at, actually, but obviously not the longest day's play, so we're not going to go crazy with that. Please comment, like, subscribe, and if you're desperate for us to answer something, then super chats are always the way to go. But hell of a test match, right? Let's have a look at the last day here. This is the entire history of New Zealand in India. So, if I'm not mistaken, in 1988, I think that is the tour that Jeremy Coney had retired from and had to and had to field while he was a commentator. So it suggests to you that even when they've done well on tours of India, it's not particularly always it's not always going great for them. And 1969 is quite an interesting one because that is the year that New Zealand win their first ever Test series, which was against Pakistan. So they played both the teams. They had wins against Pakistan and against India at different times, but they won the series against Pakistan. When I think the final game might have been called a draw when, I think I'm right in saying this, when there was a riot had broken out, I think, because they realized that Pakistan were going to lose. I think I'm remembering those facts right, unless I've got it confused with another game. But the point being is that New Zealand and India has never been a particularly good place for them to go. We can see how bad it's been of recent times when India have been really, really good. And there's maybe this other period sort of in here in the 76 period where India did very well, but mostly it's just that New Zealand haven't really looked like winning. They've found a way to draw matches, and then in this period draws were very common, and in this period, of course, draws basically disappear from Test cricket almost altogether. And so we see a big difference. So it's not as if they've gone over and always been smashed. That's more a recent thing. But New Zealand do not do particularly well in India. So for their third win, almost 40 years on from their previous one, I think only Ajaz Patel was alive when they last won in India. I mean, that's a stat, isn't it? That is a fantastic stat. Gary Morgan sent me that one. Shout out to Gary if he's around. This is the win percentage in Asia from the Senor teams. So I really wanted to have a look at this just to show you, and I didn't know what the numbers would come up, but I was really interested to see what kind of win percentage we would see. We know that these teams, South Africa, England, Australia, West Indies, New Zealand, not always as set up to travel to Asia. And there's different periods, of course. South Africa never traveled to Asia until the 90s. Australia didn't go maybe as much early on as England did. So, there's a few different variables here, but what it does show you is how uniquely inept New Zealand has been with dealing with Asian conditions specifically. You've got Bracewell in the 80s, you've got Vittori in the aughts. They really haven't had a lot of spin bowling that they can throw at any of these teams. even when they get a good spinner, the secondary spinner is often a bit of an issue for them. You've then got their batting, which I think maybe compared to some, if you look at, West Indies and Australia and England and probably South Africa, all of those, there's some players who I think are just absolutely next world level players of spin. They might have some other players who are weaker, but they quite often have, I don't know, a Neil Harvey or a Brian Lara. England have had a bunch in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and all the way through to Joe Root. South Africa, Callis and Amla, even someone like Smith. New Zealand just haven't had as many great players as spin as well. So they're not great players of spin and they don't bowl it very well. And that's why this graphic looks so dramatic and so different. And this is specifically the win percentage in India. So we know that West Indies historically had a really, really good run there. Australia, never been a great side in India, but have found ways to win games. You'd see England, again, are winning a decent amount. A lot of those would have been early on, but even of recent times, they've won a couple of tests in India, haven't they? And Pakistan with 15% of their wins. Hell of a lot of draws in Pakistan's record, because they won a series in India once by winning a single test. Was that 85, 86, 87? It was Gavaskar at the end of Gavaskar's career. So even within that, New Zealand's a long way down. And as we showed you before, it is not that many losses and a lot of draws. But even within that, it's not a good graphic, is it? And so this is a huge moment. Conditions were a lot better than perhaps you would expect. Jeremy Coney, I've just had a podcast with Jeremy Coney for TalkSport, and he sort of said they were New Zealand conditions. I think they were conditions that actually specifically helped the New Zealand current team. It helped Henry and it helped O'Rourke. Probably less so Southey, although I think Southey bowled some really good spells in this game. But I don't think the conditions helped him as much as it did perhaps the other two. So they could have come over with a slightly different kind of good bowling attack. And again, it wouldn't have suited them. O'Rourke is more of an Australian or a South African style bowler, I would say, than a traditional New Zealand seamer. And he was the exact kind of bowler that you wanted there. And of course, Matt Henry, a fantastic bowler. So all these things had to go the way of New Zealand to be able to get this result. But let's just have a look at the seam movement all the way through. So we could see that you can just see how much different that first innings was than everything else. And it is worth remembering this. For instance, Tim Southey is not a seam bowler, and he was still seaming the ball at almost 1 degree, which is a lot of movement. Anything over 0.7 degrees is tough to play, and it can be very, very brutal, and you should not do well. So you can see here just how much that first innings moved, but we had pretty good seam movement all the way through. This is not what I would expect to see in conditions like this, which tells you it was a bit more of an interesting wicket. We always knew there was going to be some help for seam bowlers. The Duleep Trophy game where the seamers took 70-80% of the wickets, I think, if I remember correctly. But what we saw was vastly more than that. So it was a game which was played certainly in conditions that helped New Zealand a little bit more there. And one particular ball, I just wanted to talk about this. This is incredible. So I will explain what you were looking at here. Bumrah bowled 2 balls to Latham today. You could see that these 2 balls landed within about, 5 to 10 to 15 centimeters of each other. Similar lengths and very much a similar line. The black ball is, let's just have a look here. The black ball, I believe, oh God, I can't see that now, is, I'm hoping anyway, is the one that ends up over here. So I think that's right. Byron might have to put something up on the screen if I'm wrong. But the black ball actually pitches on middle and leg and ends up going across. Some of that was swing, but some of that was the natural angle across. But when you pitch a ball in that position, that's against a left-hander, that's what you expect. The white ball or the yellow ball, whatever color this one is, over here, you can see here, that is actually pitched wider. So you would assume, naturally, that would even be wider over here. But instead, that has come back in. It was essentially a leg break at whatever speed it was delivered at, 87, 88 miles an hour. It might have been a little bit slower than that. I do not know how you play that. And, technically, Latham probably got himself a little bit over the line, across the line, but he got himself over the line because the previous ball had gone through here. That is a massive difference that is a wide ball outside off stump. That's not 4th or 5th stump line. That's like 6th or 7th stump line at that stage. And then the next ball is actually delivered wider. So you expect it to be out here and it ends up over here. My God. Boomer makes things incredible. But we could see here that they got a lot of swing as well. So Boomer was trying to swing the ball in to Will Young. So that would be the majority of these balls up here. So that was another theory that they had. But you can see even Siraj was swinging the ball away a little bit at times and moving it around. But they did get movement and they did get somehow. I mean, I would assume this ball over here is one that where has hit a crack. This one might have hit a crack and also seamed, but you can see that is not a particularly easy ball to face. Another one up here. So there was some balls that were doing magical things, moving in the air and off the pitch at the same time. The problem with the 107 defense is not that India cannot dismiss a team for 107 in these conditions, because they could have. It's the you have no flexibility. Everything has to go right. And early on, for the first 20 runs, you would have to say that the majority of things went right for India, except for the fact that they didn't pick up the extra wicket. So Conway could have been out many times. I thought Will Young batted a lot better, but even Will Young was, every time he faced Bumrah, looked like he was going to be dismissed. There's no padding on that kind of thing, and eventually that came back to hurt the Indian bowlers. But I thought there were some good signs from the Indian bowlers, actually, because Siraj looked like he was in rhythm again. He was quick. I thought the start of his first spell was really good. I wouldn't have given him a second spell, not because I didn't think he could do it. I just would have used Ashwin, which we'll talk about in a moment. But I thought he did that very, very well. And I thought Bumrah was exceptional. I know there was a lot of concerns about them not bowling at the stumps. I think they were bowling specifically for the cracks, and they had key plans. Like if you look at the plan to Will Young, I think they were trying to bowl these big hooping in-swingers in and with Bumrah, and then try and get one outside off stump so he would edge it. So part of that plan was not to bowl at the stumps to him. And to Conway, I would say that generally they would have bowled around the wicket to Conway, but because of they saw that crack and a little bit of unevenness in the wicket, they decided to keep going there. And how Conway didn't glove a ball to slip, or edge one through to the wicketkeeper, or drag the ball back on, or just have one scoodle on the ground and bowl him. Sometimes these things happen. But the thing is, there is no, people will get very frustrated and say, oh, they should have bowled every ball at the stumps and they should have put this fielding position in. When you're defending 107, things need to be nearly perfect for you to win the game. And it just wasn't perfect for India, even though they were nipping the ball around here everywhere. I think you could see in this kind of pattern just a little bit more of there's no massive grouping. So you can see to the right-hander with Bumrah, he's tried probably slightly wider, slightly straighter, slightly shorter, and even gone full at times. He wasn't quite sure what to do. These two things here, I think, are little groupings around where he saw cracks and he tried to get something done, and then eventually he's come over the wicket. And with Siraj, again, maybe if we're going to be slightly upset with Siraj, we talk about the length. But my guess is that he saw a crack around here and a crack around here, and you can see him trying to group the balls in those areas to be able to do that. So I'm not going to have a go at either of these people, because they got the ball to move. They made half chances happen. It just didn't quite work the way that they wanted. And when you're defending such a small total, the big advantage for New Zealand was Conway took up a lot of balls before he got out. And a lot of that was when the ball was absolutely moving everywhere. And that's what India needed, was a wicket at that point, and not getting the outside edge of Will Young, or the many different ways they could have got Conway out, just eventually came back against them. We can see Jadeja just trying to dump these balls into the foot marks. He got a couple to play around, but it didn't really work. Kuldeep, I'm not sure why Kuldeep came on before Ashwin, other than the fact they thought Will Young might struggle to pick him again, which he did, but he still also dumped him for a 6. I don't understand, and I would have to go back and have a look, but I don't understand why you had Bumrah bowling at one end and Siraj was replaced by Jadeja. I think I would have given that over to Ashwin, just because I think that I understood why they went in that direction, but I think I would have gone to Ashwin just to see if he could have got some magic to happen with the new ball, an outside edge of Will Young, for instance, or tricking one of the left-handers as normal, and that didn't quite happen. So I think there's a part of me that would have looked from that point of view at that. But yes, the fact that Ashwin didn't bowl again, people will probably blame Rohit for. Let's go through the Rohit list here. He made a mistake at the toss, even though we know that Tom Latham was also thinking about batting at the toss. I think when it comes to Rohit, he thought that the ball was going to seam. He didn't know it was going to seam and bounce the way that it did. If either of those captains had thought that, there is no way they would have even considered batting. Jadeja probably could have come on a little bit earlier in that first innings. There's no doubt that Bumrah should have bowled a spell against Southee. So there's a couple of errors there. And then we come into this innings, people will talk about Ashwin, maybe some of the fielding positions, maybe could have encouraged the bowlers to attack the stumps a little bit more. I can understand why they didn't, but I also know that people will have a go. When it comes down to it, it's like the conditions in this game went against India. They still made it a contest. And I'm not sitting here going they lost because of Rohit Sharma. They lost because no one understood how bad that toss was, and New Zealand completely exploited it. And then the wicket changed, and New Zealand got themselves into a really good position. Maybe the Southee partnership is something that can be blamed a little bit more on Rohit, but by that stage, they're already 200 runs behind in the game, aren't they? But they did get outscored. India did get outscored by Tim Southee in the first innings of this test, in case I haven't mentioned that yet. And just on India, it's quite interesting. It's clear that things have changed a little bit from that magical period from the start of 2013 until 2019, where they lose one test match, the Pune Steve O'Keefe game. There's a couple of draws in there as well. I mean, there is this period in here where there's wins and draws all together. So it hasn't all been smooth wins, but you can definitely see the difference when it comes to that it hasn't looked quite as great since then. I mean, I would say this period and this period are still good, but that was the stolen draw that New Zealand got, I assume, if I'm remembering correctly, where they were 9 wickets down, weren't they? So this is England beating them when they didn't have Ashwin and Jadeja. Am I right in saying that? That's the stolen draw where they were 9 wickets down. So either of those games could have been wins. England played brilliantly in that test, but could have been wins. You then have losing the test match when they made the conditions a little bit too variable. You could also argue this one was similar. So lost that test match. Then they had the boring draw at Ahmedabad, and then that's the Bazball one. It's not like there's a pattern here. It's just not as dominant as they were before. But I think from 20 test matches, it's still 14 wins with 2 draws and 4 losses. If you gave Indian fans that record for the next 5 or 10 years, that percentage of wins to losses to draws, I don't think anyone's not going to take it, right? Like, I wouldn't be too worried, but I have seen a couple of people discussing it. And, these things are worth discussing. I don't have any issue with that at all. And this is India's average in home tests in that time. So you can see that their batting average from 2013 to 2019 was 44. So it's dropped to 33.25. Some of that is the wickets. Some of that is that they're not batting quite as well at the moment. I think that's fair. Their spin bowling obviously has actually got better in that period. And these two things are probably a little bit related, right? From that point of view, when you really drill down on it, their pitches have probably been more deadly from 2021 to 24 than they were in that other period. But they had some pretty fruity wickets in the other period as well. And you can see the pace bowling. Not much of a change here, but interesting that the pace bowling has gone up a little bit. So it's been better for spinners, but not as good pace bowling. But the batting does look like the biggest difference there. I think that's also fair to say. All right, that's the end of the scoreboard part of the show. We will take any questions from the room. We'll have a quick break here, and then we'll come back with more scoreboard. I'm Jared Kimber. Like, subscribe, and if you're desperate for a question to be answered, remember, the best way is always via a super chat. INDvPlay helped me make this content. For detailed performance breakdowns of your game using technology and data, contact them today.
Hit Wicket is the cricket game backed by Harsha Bogle and me, so you know it's full of nerd energy. This strategic cricket game isn't just about frantic tapping. You make decisions based on how cricket actually works. You've got to set a batter up, right? And you can't hit a six from the first ball. Hit Wicket knows all that, and they made a game that makes it work with a few gaming twists in there as well. So play, build, and manage your team, because you are the batter, the bowler, the coach, the selector. I mean, you're basically everything in this game, right? And there's no ads on Hit Wicket. So download it for free for mobile and unleash your inner cricket legend.
All right, I'll see if there's anything else. Yeah, I think that I've got most of them, and Baron will keep an eye out on those. Anil says, thoughts on KL versus Sarfraz for the playing 11 spot in the BGT? Yeah, I mean, Sarfraz has put pressure on that decision again. I still think they're going to go with KL in that position just because they know that his game will hold up. But maybe there's a small argument to be had. And I do, and I do mean that, like a small argument to be had for the fact that Sarfraz has now made runs on a wicket that has a bit more pace and bounce on it. And so they can have a look at him. And maybe he has the ability to have more, okay, this is the best way of looking at it. And it'd be really interesting to see how Gambhir thinks about it. I think Sarfraz has a higher ceiling in Australia and a much lower floor. And KL is the safer option. And they've been talking about how they don't want the safer option. So from that point of view, you go with Sarfraz. But it could go horribly wrong and he might not make any runs there. I got a message today from someone who said, when Sarfraz plays against England and Australia, they won't let him hit the balls in the areas that he does. Like, yeah, he's going to hit the balls in the same areas. It'll be slightly different because slightly different kinds of wickets, but he's going to continue to hit the ball in his areas in the same way that Steve Smith hits the ball in his areas. The issue isn't whether he hits the balls in his areas. The issue is whether he has the Steve Smith-like ability to transform that incredible natural hand-eye coordination into something that works all around the world. That's the issue with Sarfraz at the moment, and none of us can answer that. Not even Gautam Gambhir. Umpire Strikes Back says, why does the atmosphere in Indian stadiums become so deflated when the opposition team achieves an historic victory? The atmosphere at the Gabba for the West Indies test was truly epic. I mean, one thing I would say is that there is an element of all fans celebrate things differently. And it's a bit like attacking Philadelphia fans because they're more passionate than fans in the rest of America. And it's like, well, that's a good thing as well. And you should be supporting your team. Cricket's an interesting one because England fans have always been a little bit more supportive of good cricket played by everyone. And that's probably, if we're being honest, far less than they used to be. And maybe they will in the future. And there are lots of fan bases that don't do that and are upset. I don't have an issue with that. If the Australian fans want to, get excited by Shimar Joseph and an exciting test match, then they're allowed to. And if the Indian fans want to be annoyed, then they're allowed to. I don't think we should police how fans feel. And if we could do that, I wouldn't be starting with cheering and everything else. I'd be policing everything else about fans. Not that. Not everyone in that ground is a cricket fan. Some people are Indian cricket fans, right? And the vast majority might be Indian cricket fans, and they're allowed to enjoy it the same way they would. There are probably other parts of India, perhaps, Kolkata, which is, the traditional cricket fans, and you might get something a little bit different. I mean, as I said, everyone cheers the way, everyone supports cricket the way that they want to support cricket. They're in the ground watching a test match. Isn't that the most important thing? Raul says, how different were the conditions today compared to the first morning? Don't you think New Zealand batters handled it much better than India? No, the conditions were nowhere near the same as the first morning. If you go back, we put the graphic up, Raul. I don't know if you need me to show it again, but the amounts of movement, in fact, let me just very quickly find this for you. You might have missed the start of the show. But if you want to know if the conditions were the same, that's the amount of seam movement we had on a day one. That's the amount of seam movement we had today. Very, very different. Also, very importantly here, very different kinds of bowlings, right? New Zealand bowlers very much hit the wicket bowlers in Henry and O'Rourke. Bumrah skids it on a bit more. Siraj skids it on a bit more. So might get different things out of the wicket. But I thought that was very favourable conditions. The difference is that India were batting on day one to try and get as many runs as possible. New Zealand took a bunch of stunning half chances. India lost 3 wickets to random bad balls. And Devon Conway didn't get out today, right? So when you said, don't you think the New Zealand batters handled it much better? Did you see Conway batting? So what did he handle better? He couldn't hit the ball. He couldn't hit the ball. So I wouldn't be sitting there and say that he was batting way better than India did. He just didn't drag one back onto the stumps. He didn't edge. There was one that went straight across him. He pushed his hand so violently at it to try and edge it. And he didn't. And sometimes that is the case. And Will Young, I thought, played Siraj pretty well. But every time Will Young played Bumrah, I thought he was going to get an edge behind. I thought that wicket was coming as well. So I had no issue. I don't think the conditions were the same. I thought Bumrah bowled brilliantly. He just didn't get the wickets. And we have to, sometimes that is the case. And that goes back to the 46 all out. There is an element of fluke when you bowl a team out for 46. And I don't want to take that away from New Zealand or even say that India batted poorly. But what I mean is sometimes you play and miss and sometimes you edge. And so you have a situation like England bowling Australia out at Trent Bridge where there are a lot of balls in that test match in that session that Australia generally would have played and missed at. But in that particular occasion, for whatever reason, they all seem to edge them and they all seem to go to fielders. That's a very similar thing to what happened to India here. Doesn't mean that New Zealand weren't on top and the conditions weren't tough and everything else. But India could have made 130 if Conway had dropped that catch, if the Virat Kohli one had not gone to hand, if one or two of the other catches hadn't have been taken, which is a normal thing. There were some tough takes. There were some takes low to the ground. All these sorts of things happen. And what would have happened is, let's say India got to the 25th over and they were like, I don't know, 45 for 5, right? Rather than being 46 all out. The ball was clearly by that stage wouldn't have been doing as much, and they could have even had a comeback. But even let's forget the comeback and let's just say they got to 120, 130. What you saw today was Conway not getting out, the bowlers not being quite as suited, but also not getting as much assistance as what we saw from the New Zealanders. I thought Bumrah bowled really, really well. I didn't see anything in Conway's technique that suggested that he was any better. Latham faced 6 balls. He struggled on this wicket. I thought Will Young played Siraj well, but my memory of Will Young playing Bumrah was still playing and missing outside off stump over and over again. So no. Music and Stuff says, what did New Zealand achieve making Southee captain? Did Latham need that transition period after Williamson? This is a weird question because I think your assumption is that Latham was always going to get the captaincy. And they might have just thought that Southee was a better captain. So I think you're coming at this from, and I don't know what angle, but I think you're coming at this from a very different angle than what I'm coming at it from, which is, I think they probably thought that Southee was a better captain than Latham. And so they had Tim Southey, and Tim Southey said, I want to play on, and I still think I've got a lot of cricket left in me, and they agreed, and on they go. So yeah, it was. I have no issue at all with that. You know, you try and pick your best captain, and you go from there. Shubham said, Ashwin and Jadeja are not as good as they were before. A very easy thing to ask when they've just been in a year, on a test wicket that doesn't favour them as much. So I think if you were to ask that on a spinning wicket right at the moment, you probably look a little bit silly, right? But you can ask it right now, and you have, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with the question. But I think if you ask it right now because of what we have just seen, and it's very easy to say that they're not as good. So if we look at just them, I'm just trying to bring it up as we do it. But if we look at just them in India by year as a group, as a collection of bowlers in the last in their career so far. So overall, they average a joint 21 in India. It's pretty handy. Imagine having two of them. Absolute ridiculousness of having both of these guys. So if we look at it by year, which I'm trying to do, last year in 2023, they okay. So in 2019, they played 10 tests. They averaged joint 28. That is the second worst year they ever had. The worst year they ever had was 2012, and they averaged 31. So they've never averaged jointly more than 31.14 in India in a year together. And they've also never taken less than 22 wickets in a year. This year, they have 16 innings in India. They have gone for 69 wickets, an average of 24.23. The 3 previous years, they averaged 14, 15, and 28. And this is the year that they've gone for the most runs. Part of that is Bazball, of course, a little bit from this test match as well. So they've gone at a run and over more. So right at the moment, to say that they're not good is not true. No, wait, what was your phrasing? Sorry, I didn't want to throw you under the bus. Have they started to decline? I wouldn't say that suggests they started to decline. I would say that teams have probably decided to attack them a little bit more. Certainly England did, and then Ravindra did. But I think they also had some surfaces that were spinning a lot more. If you remember the England series, I think those pitches were a lot more even, and much. There were some good pitches for spin, but there were some good pitches for batting as well in that series. And this particular test match as well, we have another one that was good for batting. You look at the last series against Bangladesh, there was also some wickets taken by seam bowlers in that series. So some good conditions for seam bowlers at varying times in that. Are they starting to decline? Well, they should be. I'm not sure that's exactly what the numbers say, Pratik, at the moment. Oh, wait. Or was Pratik sent a different message? Or was that Pratik just sent? Did I miss that one? Oh, Harsh says, Rohit's captaincy was clueless. You bowled out for 46 on the first day. It's probably not your captaincy that has cost a test match. And I don't think that means that you don't discuss it, because this is what this channel is for, right? It's like, but when it comes down to it, I don't think that was 100% the case. I think I would. I think I went through it before, so I won't go through all the different things that Rohit did again. I wouldn't say his captaincy was clueless. He probably made a few mistakes. I think New Zealand made some mistakes with their captaincy as well. They've won the game. What if Latham had decided to bat first? We know he was thinking about it. So, these things happen. Roger said, how do you decide what you're going to talk about on your channel and talk sport? On my channel, just whatever comes to mind. It's very funny, actually. I did a video yesterday on the main channel about Rohit Sharma, about Rishabh Pant 6, because I thought it was a really fascinating cricket point that I was trying to make, which is sometimes the balls, when they are replaced, can change the game so violently. And that was definitely a situation. I've just seen that Conrad McBad, Monty Panesar's new best friend, has said that Tom Latham said he would have batted first. I mean, that just shows you that a lot of the hate going to Rohit will be about the toss. And I said at the time, I think both teams would have done that. Sorry, to get back to the previous question. How do we decide what we're going to talk about? Yeah, so I thought it was a really interesting cricket point that the ball had changed. Rishabh Pant hit this out, and then suddenly there was a massive collapse on the end. I received a message from someone online saying, how could I do this pro BCCI propaganda? It's like, it's literally the most cricket piece I've ever done. It's such a nerdy cricket piece. And it's like, but people can't see it. And someone else said, something about how Jared is selling out to the Indians. How is that selling out to the Indians? I'm literally looking at the game and analyzing it and showing you the stats of what has happened. But people don't want that sort of stuff. So I just want to talk about cricket. And the politics around cricket are really interesting at times, and the stories around cricket. And, I see what I do within our network, the Good Areas Network, as storytelling, right? Sometimes we use data to tell stories, and sometimes we use historical knowledge and journalism and research and all those sorts of things. But I see it as storytelling. To me, it's really about what comes to me as a story. So there are some pieces that, I mean, Varun and Cheyenne are much more probably data-driven than I am. And so they will be like, oh, we have to do this because this is, and I'm like, it's not for me. And sometimes Bayram, who's probably more newsy in the way that he thinks, he'll be like, this is the news. I'm like, yeah, I got nothing to say on that. So I go about it. That's what I look at from this channel. This live channel is mostly about the podcast and a little bit about the scoreboard things. So there's a more of a natural newsy and thing that we're following when we're making decisions over here. Whereas the main channel is almost completely story. Like what is interesting to me on that day or in that week or in the moment when I'm doing the writing or the planning, or if Estelle or CS or Bayram or Cheyenne or Varun or, pitches an idea, and then suddenly you're like, well, that's a good idea. So I like that story. Let's do that story. We go about it from that point of view. It's very different from a TalkSport point of view. TalkSport depends on who I'm on with. There might be a particular thing that TalkSport has to talk about. When you're commentating, you're trying to keep the game moving, but you're also trying to keep the conversation moving. So there was a point yesterday when the new ball was taken and we got stuck on a conversation about the Toblerone because it was a fun conversation and people who had been listening for days really liked it, but it was also a really important moment in the cricket. So you're trying to cover the cricket correctly and do that. When you're on a podcast, it's a little bit different with TalkSport, but again, generally, John is the TalkSport cricket editor, so it's probably more his idea, but he might occasionally say, what do you think about this? But when I'm asked a question, it's up to me how I answer it. So I still have that that side of it. But yeah, it's as a broadcaster, you are constantly just trying to cover the moment, cover the story in the best way that you can with what you're good at. Right? Everyone is different. You had Dan McCarty, Jeremy Coney, myself. We had Monty Panesar and Steve Harmison and Gareth Batty and John and Macca. All these different people with all these different skills and knowledge and everything, and you're trying to get the most out of the other person and get the most out of yourself when you're in a broadcast. It's very different than Good Areas where I'm just like, what's the best story? Okay, so today everyone in the world's going to be talking about, I don't know, this, and I'm going to be talking about the fact that when balls get changed, sometimes cricket games change really violently. That to me was the best story, and I went with it. Crunk says, should Bumrah play the next test match? I don't think so. He looked fine to me physically, so I wouldn't be worried about it from that point of view, Crunk. Again, I always defer to what does the bowler think at this point. It'd be really interesting to see what Bumrah does, what Bumrah thinks. I think he's probably more use for them at Wankhede. So if they are planning on resting him, I'd probably rest him for, based on what I know of the wickets, I would probably rest him for, and I haven't looked at the first class records in Pune of recent times, but I'd probably be more likely to rest him for Pune if they are not going to play him in both of those games. These things are just conversations between you and the player. Gabba says, where do you rate Gill's 890 season in IPL history? It's a lot of runs, isn't it? I think one, there's a lot of strike rate conversations I think that can be had, in these sorts of conversations, and I get that. But I do think that we still have to have a I think we have to have a understanding of what the general runs are. And when I think most of this, I'm just trying to bring them all up now. I think other than Mike Hussey's 700 run season, I think most of the highest scoring, every time anyone scored over 170, the strike rates have been kind of eerily similar. And the reason for that is you get in and you make these big scores, and then you end up being able to catch up your strike rate anyway. So even if you have batted like an anchor, so if you look at Williamson, we know Williamson is a slow scorer, but even his strike rate is 142. So there's an element of catch up to it. That's why we look at true records when we look at this. But I rate that I covered quite a few of those games. I rate that series pretty high. I don't know if I have it as like the highest, but anyone who can make a huge amount of runs in an IPL season, I think deserves to be right up there. But yeah, I don't have a list of it. We did a bunch of the MVP peaks though. I'm sure Shubman Gill's season comes up in that. There's a whole series over on the main channel if you want to have a look at that, Gabba. Is that us? Are we done? Beautiful. All right. Well, one thing I did want to finish with, and we'll probably do a video with this on the main channel. Thank you to Conor McBad with his super chat. I just explained the Conor McBad thing for those of you who don't know. So on TalkSport, they put the commentary up on YouTube, and I think it was during a rainbow that Conor sent a message through to Monty Panesar saying that he'd gone to school with a guy called Dev Panesar, who'd always claimed to be related to Monty. And had asked if that was if he really was related to Monty Panesar, and it turned out that he was. That Monty was really excited about that, especially because he kept calling them his small uncle and his small cousin, which made us laugh even more. But thanks to Conor for that one. But yeah, just on New Zealand, there'll be a video up on the major channel. Probably, I don't know how quickly we'll get it up, but about New Zealand, and I know the conditions were in favour of them, and I know that Latham not batting first certainly made a big difference, and that ball and the pitch evening out a little bit towards Kuldeep's innings, which meant that by the time New Zealand got on the park, the batting was a lot easier at that point, and India didn't have the third seamer. You can throw in some of the mistakes that Rohit made. I think not putting on Jasprit Bumrah when Southee first came in was a huge one. I think it was probably the biggest mistake in the game, and probably won't be remembered all that much. But having said that, this is not a great New Zealand side. It's a great New Zealand side that I wasn't even sure if they were in transition. I feel like now seeing O'Rourke bowl again, and everyone will know how high I was on him before this Test match. So certainly, I can't even buy any more stock. I've bought all the stock. But with knowing that Sears is around, and hopefully if Jameson and Henry can not be injured all the time, Ratcham Ravindra, there's a lot of players around this New Zealand side that I really, really like at the moment. But I still think this is just such a huge win to be able to go to India and do what they have done, even when the conditions were in their favour. And let's forget the first innings for a moment. There had to be several moments during India's third innings where they were just thinking to themselves, oh shit, we've bowled a team out for 46. We have a lead of 350, and we are in a situation where we could lose this Test match. We've just seen what's happened with Pakistan versus England. Like, that goes through your head. And, Rishabh Pant and the six and all that sort of stuff, at that point, they must have been just thinking, this is not going to go the way that we want it to. So all credit goes to them for being able to pull it back after the emotional gut punches that they'd had for the first 80 odd overs of that innings. I think nothing but respect for them to be able to do that. But it's such a big win for New Zealand cricket, such a big win, and I think we have to. There'll be a lot of people that will call this a fluke and everything else. There are elements to it that all fell into place for them, but they were still made to work for it, which is maybe the most New Zealand thing ever. We bowled India out for 46. Tim Southey outscored them in the first innings. We had a 350-run lead, and we still felt like we could have lost the game all the way through till until we needed 40 runs to win. That's so New Zealand. Roger says, is Siraj declining as a bowler in tests? I don't think he's declining as a bowler in tests. I think he's a rhythm bowler. When he bowled today at the start, I was like, boom, he's in rhythm. This is going to be good. And what speeds did he get up to? Over 140. When he's not in rhythm, he bowls at 130, and he just doesn't have that zip off the pitch. He needs to be either getting the sideways movement off the pitch, or he needs to be able to get that extra energy off the pitch to be consistently good. And he doesn't know how to replicate the sideways movement all the time, which is part of the reason why it's so hard to play him when he's bowling really well. And he's a rhythm bowler who can't always be at full energy. So I don't know if he's declining as a bowler in tests, because I thought he bowled really well today. And I really like the way he went about it. But there's been a lot of him bowling at around 130 Ks without getting much sideways movement. And I think that question from Rajat is perfectly viable. Anyway, I'm done. Oh, actually, wait. Sorry, Varun is desperate to leave. Zishan said, what are India's chances of making the World Test Championship? Okay, so I have this here, and let me just share it with you, because I should have brought it up during the other show. The main part of the show is here. Okay. All right, so hopefully everyone can see this, and I've done this correctly. So let us assume that India win the next 2 test matches. They will go into both of those games as favourite. I can't imagine any situation where they won't go into favourite. They might not win them, but let's imagine that they win them. Let's imagine that Bangladesh beat South Africa in both series, and that's a bit of a push, but I've done that for a reason. And then India, if India draw a series, this series, or there's even a couple of draws, things get a little bit more confusing at that point, right? So I originally thought that Australia would win 3-2. That gives India the 64%, and that is on South Africa winning all of their home games. And also Australia winning 1 and losing 1 in Sri Lanka, but Australia might also win both of those, right? But I just want to go back to this series that I mentioned a moment ago. If South Africa win both of those, and Australia managed to win 4, or if there's a draw, you can see now it's a little bit more touch and go. So New Zealand are nowhere near the World Test Championship, but there is an element here that things can go wrong. So there's a few variable results in there. I think it's unlikely Sri Lanka beat Australia 2-0, but it's not impossible, right? It's the same with Bangladesh beating South Africa, but it's also possible that South Africa win 2-0, or there's a draw and South Africa win 1 test, or it's a draw in the entire series, etc., etc. It's a little bit more iffy for India now, because we don't know what's going to happen in this series for them as well. So, sorry, I should have put that one up before. But that is it. We are 100% finished. We're gone. I'm out the building. I'm no longer in TalkSport. I am in bed where I should be. This is Jared Kimber. This is a Scoreboard. We will see you again for the next test. We've got a bunch of podcasts as well. So if you've just come for the Scoreboard, the podcasts are here all the time, even when there are no scoreboards.
I have a book out with Abhishek Mukherjee, and it is called Overthrowing Cricket's Empire. And it's about the stories of how each team beat England for the first time. We go all the way back to the demon Fred Spofforth getting annoyed at W.G. Grace for acting a little bit like Alex Carey. And then we come all the way to present times with Rashid Khan's England's redemption. We cover every single team to beat England in a major international, but we also talk about the incredible stories like the barefoot basher from Fiji that almost played for New Zealand. In fact, this book is full of tales like that, like how Pakistan lost a top batter after he was on the run from an angry husband of a movie star he was having an affair with, and also how one future captain of his nation realised he might have to go out and bat at Lords and that he didn't own his own pads. Cricket was used as a tool by the Empire, but what happens when those nations grow up and get good at it? Find Overthrowing Cricket's Empire on Amazon today.